Welcome, everyone who is already trickling in. Thank you so much for joining us on this, in some places, cold and snowy Saturday, and in others, I think I heard from our California friends that it's in the 70s. So wherever you are in these mid-apocalyptic moments that we're all weathering, thank you so much for taking some time out of your Saturday to join us. It is such a privilege that we get to do our second episode of DemilitarizeU on a very important topic of the truth and the truth being under attack here in the United States, and particularly featuring some incredible stories of courageous whistleblowers and radical truth tellers who have uplifted important information for the public at great personal cost. And so today, without further ado, my name is Brittany DeBarros. I use she pronouns, and I'm the organizing director and a proud member of About Face Veterans Against the War, formerly known as Iraq Veterans Against the War. And many of you may know that we have many members in our 15-year legacy now that have been among some of these truth tellers, GI resistors, active duty folks following their conscience. Which is why this episode is near and dear to our heart. And I will invite our incredible guests today to just go ahead and introduce themselves. Lisa, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Lisa Ling, and I was formerly in the drone program. I speak out against arming drones, and I'm here because both Reality Winner and Daniel Hale also were in the drone program, and I know the damage that does, and so it just helps me hold them in higher esteem because they're two incredibly brave individuals.
Absolutely. And if you don't know who those folks are, don't worry. We will get into talking a little bit more about their story throughout the show. Billie, would you like to go next?
Yes, my name is Billie Winner Davis, and I am the mother of Reality Lee Winner. Reality is a United States Air Force veteran, and she is presently serving a 63-month prison term for releasing a classified document that had proof about an attack on our election in 2016. Prior to my daughter's arrest, I had very little awareness or experience information about whistleblowing at all. But we were thrust into this with her arrest and her jailing, and I have come to have deep respect for anyone who is a whistleblower and who supports whistleblowers in our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being with us today, Billie. And Jesselyn.
Sure. I'm Jesselyn Radack. I'm a lawyer, and I represent whistleblowers. Unfortunately, a number of them have been investigated or prosecuted under a very strict law. And so I've been involved in their cases in various different capacities, and Realities is definitely one of the most extreme, severe examples of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's such a privilege to have you with us. Thank you for taking time. I know that you are very busy working on some of these very important cases. So let's get into it. I mean, I think that the starting question has to be, what is a whistleblower, right? As Billie said, many of us don't really know much about that until we're forced to kind of be confronted with that situation because we know someone, or because, someone is in the news being persecuted, basically, in high profile ways like we've seen.
Basically, a whistleblower is an employee who reveals fraud, waste, abuse, illegality, or dangers to public health and safety. And supposedly they are entitled to protection, but the law really has no. So often they end up being subject to criminal investigation or even prosecution, and in reality, imprisonment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the response that a lot of folks have, that I know when I was starting out, I was sympathetic to, is, well, why didn't they go through the proper channels? There are proper whistleblower channels, and they could have done it the right way. So tell us a little bit about how that's supposed to work and the kind of realities that, no pun intended for reality, but the realities of what people face when they try to do that.
Sure. Well, organizations tend to have channels for whistleblowing. A corporate whistleblower, however, would have far more protections than a government whistleblower. And so you have these channels, but often, unfortunately, they've proven at best ineffective and at worst an entrapment of sorts for whistleblowers who've tried to go through the proper channels. And you can look at someone like Thomas Drake, who went through every conceivable proper channel and still ended up getting charged with espionage, versus someone like Edward Snowden, who saw what Tom Drake went through and went straight to the media, who still ended up being prosecuted for espionage. So I mean, you have these channels, but there's no enforcement mechanism to actually protect the whistleblower. So the proper channels is more of a myth. And I mean, once in a blue moon, they work, but usually not for national security and intelligence matters. In fact, that category of whistleblower is not covered by the protections. There's a big carve out.
Right.
Wow.
And that's been one of the challenges with my daughter's case. So many people turned their backs on her, saying that she wasn't a whistleblower because she didn't go through the proper channels. And, what she reported really didn't fit any of the categories. Basically, what my daughter did was she blew the whistle on national intelligence because they were hiding information from the American people that she felt was important for us to know. And so from the beginning, we battled trying to even get support for my daughter because so many people would not support her as a whistleblower.
I think there's been a tendency to by the media and by a lot of people, especially in the government, to divide whistleblowers into heroes or traitors. And that's just a very unhelpful binary way to look at it, because most of these people are government employees who have revealed sometimes war crimes, sometimes severe, major issues of public importance. What Reality was accused of revealing later became an issue in the impeachment of the president of the United States. It's that serious. And these folks should be applauded and certainly not investigated and prosecuted and incarcerated. It's a very dangerous trend to paint them as traitors when really they're among the most patriotic people I've ever met in my life.
I've spent a little time in New York, and I see in the subways still, if you see something, say something. And it seems to apply selectively when it comes to whistleblowing and things like election interference or drone murders. Then it's like the pressure is on to stay silent, and all of the wheels of governance try to, impede it.
Yeah. I certainly, for those who don't know my story, I certainly experienced that and the binary that is really manufactured, like Jesselyn, you're saying, in that I certainly wouldn't consider myself a whistleblower, because in my case, all I did was, while I was on active duty, I posted graphics with publicly available facts about what our DoD was doing, facts from our own public government reports, right? So not even an NGO, but Air Force reports that were made public that I found on Google that said, this is how many bombs we dropped. This is how much oil we're burning per day, right? 10.3 million gallons of oil per day. We dropped record-breaking bombs on Afghanistan, 7,600 something bombs last year, right? When people think it's slowing down. And there was nothing classified. There was nothing partisan, right? There was nothing. And yet I was investigated. They transferred my investigation to the Army Counter Intel Unit to investigate me as a traitor, right? And I was called a traitor on the internet, and just all of these things. And, people are going to say what they're going to say. But I just remember, being so struck that that this was the counterpoint, I think, to when people say, oh, well, it's okay if you don't release secret documents, or if you follow the channels, or if, and it to me, I feel like my example, it just shows how much actually it's about repressing the truth.
That's an excellent point, because I think there's almost this macabre, who is really a whistleblower, whose whistleblowing counts. Well, usually there's not a perfect whistleblower, because we don't have the systems in place for people to blow the whistle safely. So they're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. They go through internal channels and often get hammered, or they go directly to the press and still get hammered. And that's the government's favorite way, or the wrongdoer's favorite way, of deflecting attention from what was actually revealed. So I applaud your own whistleblowing too.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it also raises this question. We have this plastic patriotism that has really been intentionally, in my opinion, cultivated in the United States, that it's kind of just like, thank you for your service, you took this oath of loyalty. But, you know, I know in my position, I was in the position to say, well, loyalty to what? Right? Like, is it loyalty to the values that the Army tells me that I'm supposed to have, which are integrity, personal courage, right? Which means I have to, if I believe in those things, then I have to tell the truth, right? To my own troops, to the public. And we're supposed to have public accountability of the military and of these agencies, right? And so how can the public hold them accountable if those very agencies are the ones who are preventing the truth about what they're doing from being told, and the only people to report them to are them and their buddies, basically, right? Like, where do you go?
That's one of the problems. I mean, that always gets thrown at whistleblowers. Oh, you promised to keep this secret. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. And my response is always, yes, they also took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Right. And so when they're trying to do that your constitutional oath, I would submit, holds equal or greater weight than whatever you put in the umpteen NDAs you signed during the course of your career.
Right.
Exactly.
I took one oath, and I basically signed the NDAs, and the NDAs, had caveats in them as well. They didn't say anything about keeping silent if unlawful acts were happening. They didn't, they basically said, don't tell anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, speaking as a vet, also myself, and I know, Lisa, you had this experience. I think you're often put in this position of like, am I loyal to the government, right? Does loyalty to the country mean I'm loyal to the government, or does it mean I'm loyal to the people, right? And for me, those things I think are at odds more than people realize, in that the government, there's just been such an increasing trend towards the government, all of this gray area, right? Of like, and also not gray area, right? Of just surveillance that has been exposed by folks like Snowden and others, by our own government, that is very obviously illegal. And yet those folks are still persecuted as a traitor when they're exposing that the government was doing something illegal, right? And yet they're the ones that end up,
I think,
prison.
So strongly in the last 4 years, with the fact that loyalties got shifted even further than loyalty to the government. It became loyalty to the president. For the first time. I mean, he was actually talking about how a whistleblower should be killed and treated like a spy. And that was just a level of retaliation. I mean, retaliation under Obama had already been extreme and unprecedented towards whistleblowers, and it's just gotten even worse.
Mm-hmm.
What's incredible is these things that that Reality Winner and what Daniel Hale is accused of doing have been front and center in all the mainstream news. I mean, day and night there was talks about the threats to our electoral processes in 2016. And in all of those countless hours of discussing this on mainstream media, not one person, maybe one, yes, actually, I think one, I think it was Chris Hayes, mentioned the name Reality Winner. Just one. And they talk about extrajudicial killings in the media a lot. And not many people mention, the name Daniel Hale. And, although he's been accused and he did plead not guilty, I still find it remarkable that the whistleblowers that we're discussing here are not mentioned in all of these countless hours of media broadcasts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would be curious to back up a little bit. I'm sure folks tuning in would love to hear a little bit more about these two cases in particular. Billie, would you mind sharing us a little bit of the background of Reality's case and what she was accused of? I know you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but tell us a little bit about what that's looked like for her and what we know thanks to her.
Right. Well, Reality was interrogated at her home in Georgia on June 3rd, 2017. There were actually 11 male FBI agents that stormed her home. 9 of them were armed. She was not read her Miranda rights. She was taken to a back room in her house that she had already told them she was uncomfortable being in. And basically, she, was interrogated, and she did admit to the agents that she was the one that had leaked a document. It was a classified document to an online media outlet, The Intercept. The document that she leaked was, I think, a 5-page document, and basically it outlined the intelligence summaries with regard to what the Russians had been doing, trying to attack our election systems through sending spear phishing emails to the systems and to the people that worked on the election systems. Basically, the document outlined the 21 states that had been the focus of their attack at that time. We know now that it was all of the states. It wasn't just those 21, but the document that she leaked, basically outlined their attack on those 21 states. Mm. So what happened with my daughter is, after admitting to these FBI agents that she had leaked the document, they arrested her and threw her in jail. My daughter was denied bail. They made her out to be like a terrorist sympathizer. They basically took her service in the Air Force and weaponized it against her instead of really looking at what she had done in the Air Force. Like Lisa said, she was attached to the drone program. She was actually given a commendation medal for her service, but they used that against her and basically made it seem like, because she knew all these languages, because she had all this information in her head, because of the work that she had done in the government, that she would go out and she would destroy America with this. And so they couldn't let her out of jail. So my daughter basically, was stuck in a small county jail in rural Georgia, which was horrendous, for over a year. And she was, looking back at it, she was forced to take their plea deal. And the plea deal, she pled guilty, she accepted responsibility, and they still, got her with a 63-month prison sentence. And she's not eligible for any less restrictive environment. She is in a maximum security prison environment. People, try to make it seem like, well, she'll just get through it. Well, think about it. She's in a maximum security prison. She sleeps with murderers. She's in an environment with people who have committed violent acts. And what is she guilty of? She's guilty of sending a document to a media outlet to tell us the truth, because our government was basically lying to us and they were hiding it from us. You think back to the time after the election, there was so much talk, and there is now too, so much talk about how the Russians have tried to interfere with, our elections, and now they're attacking our other agency services. Back then, our own government was lying to us and saying that it was all a hoax. It was not true. It was not happening. Well, our intelligence agencies had the proof, and our intelligence agencies were keeping quiet about it because, it was basically being squashed by our administration. And so somebody out there had to tell us the truth. Unfortunately, it was my daughter, or fortunately. I am very proud of what she did. I'm very proud of her bravery, because somebody had to tell us the truth about what was happening, about the fact that we were being jeopardized and we were, under attack. And so, but I also want people to realize, just how vindictive our government is and how much they went after her. The denial of bail, the fact that her team couldn't defend her because of the Espionage Act and what that means when you're charged with that. And so she basically had no choice but to plead guilty. And I mean, today she is still in prison. 3.5 years later, she is still in prison and suffering. And she did try to file for a compassionate release when COVID-19 struck, when the pandemic hit, and she's been denied that even. And so she did contract COVID. She suffered with COVID over the summer in prison. And, and they deny, anything with regard to her.
That's so awful, Billie. Yeah, the story of what has happened to her is so awful, especially with the backdrop of how much it has so obviously, like you said, dominated the news cycle. The American public has very much benefited from this risk, this moral choice, right, of conscience that she made, and yet, so many folks, like Lisa said, don't even know her name. And so I hope some folks tuning in, share this, spread the word. The more that we can do to uplift awareness about the stories of these folks, we need to support and encourage the people who are willing to have the incredible courage and moral courage to do things like this. And so important that we don't just benefit from what they've revealed, but that we also support them in the aftermath of that.
Yeah. And it's important for people to now also support Daniel Hale as he goes through this, because we don't need another young veteran patriot out there going through this same thing. And there's so many, people don't even know his name. I'm fortunate that we've been, building the support for reality in the last 3.5 years. But here we have another person going through the same thing, and nobody knows his name because nobody will say his name.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to bring up really quickly is that, Reality didn't say this because she wanted notoriety. She first did this anonymously. And the other thing that people don't know is that there's been journalists who have tried to get access to speak to Reality in prison over and over and over again. And this is selective. Why is it that some inmates, even Charles Manson got to get media visits, right? Why is it that Reality does not? And I think that, and any pressure to put for this to happen ends up hurting Reality.
Yeah. And the truth, right? It's part of this broader effort to really suppress the truth and truth telling that we're here to talk about. I shared in the comments the link where folks can learn more about how to support Reality in the days ahead. That's standwithreality.org is where you can find updates for actions that you can take. Please, at every opportunity, every time you see a news story that is related to the information that she gifted the public, basically at great cost, please remember to uplift her. And remind folks that there are things that they can be doing to support her in this, in the consequences that she's facing, despite the fact that she shouldn't.
I think also be aware, whistleblowers usually get smeared as being out for fame or profit, and that is not what motivated Daniel or Reality or any of the whistleblowers who've actually been prosecuted. They did not benefit, and they did not try to benefit from this. This is not how one goes about making their name. They took great personal risk, and they chose their conscience over their career, and in Reality's case, and perhaps Daniel's, maybe their freedom. Daniel's trial is not until April if that goes forward, depending on COVID. And depending on a new administration that might be a little bit more rational towards whistleblowers, one can only hope. But yeah, this is about punishing people. It's about making an example of whistleblowers so that no one else even thinks of doing this.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So we've heard the name Daniel Hale. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit more about Daniel's story?
Yeah, I might get a little teary-eyed because, I mean, he was in the drone program, and I can't even begin to tell the public what that's like. It's a program that involves extrajudicial killings. It's a program where, armed drones are terror, and it's just enough to be out of the military and out of that and to just recover from knowing what we've participated in, all of us. And then he was living his life, going to college. It should have been the most important thing in his world, but he had this sword of Damocles hanging over his head. Because when we were doing the film National Bird, and I didn't really know about this at the time, his house was being raided, and he was going through the beginnings, and for years nothing happened, and then they just dug up this old case. Actually, Jeff Sessions, I guess the president started complaining about whistleblowers, and he dug up some old cases, and there sat Daniel's case. And just when he was getting back to being on his feet and living his life, now he's stuck in DC waiting for court case after, waiting for, after extension after extension. And he's just a young man who's trying to live his life. He didn't do, he wasn't out to get famous. He wasn't out. I mean, he's been accused of something that, giving out information that the public has the right to know. I mean, our taxes are paying for these extrajudicial killings. Mm-hmm. And, in reality's case, it's our voting system, our, these are like foundational things that our country is supposed to stand for. And what we see are people getting persecuted for standing up and saying, wait a minute, this is wrong. And Daniel did that in the film National Bird. If you haven't seen it, I hope that you take the time to watch it and really understand what is happening with your tax dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, what Daniel and you revealed is extra important, especially because, the Obama-Biden administration came in with a mandate to end the wars. And then, here we are 20 years in nearly. And so we know that obviously that did not happen. But what did happen is that the wars got much quieter. And for those who are students of military history, you'll know that this is also a modern American trend in that happened in Vietnam, the transition from a ground war to an air war to make when the war was becoming increasingly unpopular, that made it quieter, gave the perception of withdrawal while the violence didn't actually stop. It's important that we acknowledge that Bush started the wars, but Obama drastically expanded the drone program and lauded it, and his administration lauded it as this precise, less violent option. And yet, thanks to folks like Lisa and Daniel, we know that is false. It is not precise. It's not legal in most cases. In many cases, there have been not only illegal strikes within places that are named combat zones, but places that are our supposed allies, right? Like in Pakistan and other places where, it was just too easy for there to be orders to fly over the border and make strikes wherever we want. And that's an incredibly dangerous precedent and program that has been developed.
And then it was turned over to the CIA and made even more secretive. And
right.
So
Right. And then when we think about the machine behind all of this, right, these defense contractors that we talk a lot about in our Drop the Mic campaign, Mic standing for military industrial complex, there is a lot of profit motive behind a lot of these things as well, right? And so, one of the things that I got in trouble for posting, which was a publicly available fact, is that the United States in 2018 cleared a record-breaking, I think it was $76 billion worth of weapons sales around the world. And one example of those is trying to export the technology of armed drones, and these other things that we've been lying to the American public about, and then trying to convince other governments to spread their violence by buying from our weapons companies that are based in the United States through brokered deals through the State Department. Like, how crazy is that? Our State Department does weapons brokering? That's, when you just intuitively think about that, that just seems like a bad idea, right? But it's not. It's quite common, and Lisa has been on the forefront of efforts to block some of the expansion of those programs to other countries. Lisa, are you in the place to share? Are you able to share any of what you've been working on that front?
Last week we talked to some people in the SPD at the from the German Bundestag, and we basically put forth, Sean Westmoreland and myself put forth arguments as to why armed drones are terror. And basically, once you have armed drones, you become a terrorist state. And it's not necessarily if you fire them. I mean, imagine if you had an armed drone above you right now and you didn't know if it was going to be fired on you or the person sitting next to you. Then logic would dictate that it's just as safe to go buy groceries as it is to put down an IED. And so this doesn't detract from war and violence. It encourages it and spreads it. And so we'd really like to see Germany, who hasn't armed their drones yet, take a principled stance in the ethical use of these emerging technologies.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Along those lines, I would applaud governments from other nations, including Germany and France and Austria, have been far more interested in hearing from Lisa and people like Reality and people like Daniel, people who are the whistleblowers, than our own government, which, I mean, we've submitted testimony to Congress. They've never called any of them to testify about their experiences.
We even have Afghans living under drones show up in Congress, and Congress didn't show.
Wow. I'm struck by, the disrespect of, that strikes me. I deployed to Afghanistan, and for me, the really eye-opening thing was that I went as a true believer, thinking I'm going to help the Afghan people, and then just seeing how much all of the structure around me was not actually built to help the Afghan people, and in fact was doing incredible harm. And so on top of that, I think it's case in point that they're not even interested in hearing from the folks who were supposedly fighting this whole war, right, to help. Yeah, I think that says it all. Wow. So I posted the link as well in the comments to where Daniel is currently facing prosecution, as was mentioned, facing 50 years in prison potentially for, again, for being accused of following his conscience and uplifting something that arguably the American public has a right to know anyway. And certainly the folks who are harmed by our drones around the world have a right to have the truth told transparently, right? And so whatever you can do to support him, in the link that I shared, there's more about his story. There's a link to a petition you can sign. That petition is almost at the goal number of signatures, so please sign and share, and as well as a fundraiser. As Lisa mentioned, obviously it's difficult to be facing prosecution. It's difficult to hold down work. He was also injured recently. And
he was damaged too. I mean, the drone program damage to the young people. And so, I mean, holding down work and all that. Plus he's stuck in DC waiting for trial at EVDA, away from his family, away from his peers, away from his home.
Right.
95% of my drone clients are suffering from PTSD, are dealing with unemployment, difficulty just keeping connected to other people because of the trauma of just having the moral guilt of having participated in this kind of program. I mean, they've already been punished enough, I would submit, by having just to deal with and grapple with their own legacy. And some have been able to do that in more productive ways. And I applaud Lisa for being able to speak out publicly about this and for her willingness to testify before parliamentary bodies and stuff like that. But Daniel was another person who was speaking out about this and is now being punished severely, unmercifully for it. And Reality is being punished because she dared to speak out to a newspaper, which is her First Amendment right to do that. I mean, your secrecy agreements don't trump your constitutional rights, especially when you're talking about something that involves illegality or revealing illegality.
Right.
It's clearly censorship, not allowing any news media to talk to her. I mean, she has much more to talk about than anything that was in her non-disclosure agreement. She's taken responsibility for her actions. I just find that particularly abhorrent.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Probably the hardest part for our family was, when they did charge her under the Espionage Act, which is the same thing that they're doing with Daniel Hale. And when you just look at it, I mean, every person would know that it's wrong to charge Reality and Daniel under the Espionage Act. Espionage, should be for people who betray their country, not for people who protect it and people who speak out to, protect it and to tell the Americans the truth. She didn't work with a foreign country. She didn't work with an enemy. She didn't sell secrets, and she wasn't a spy. But yet they were able to use the Espionage Act to bury her and to make her untouchable. And, it's going to have an impact on her for the rest of her life. I know that recently there's been legislation introduced to try to reform the use of the Espionage Act against Americans. And I hope that at some point that this is taken seriously and that other leaders in Congress will take this and really work with it, because that's probably the worst thing about what's happened with Reality and, with Daniel. When the government does charge you under this, you really, your chances of defending yourself and getting out from under it are very minimal. The government has unlimited resources to use against citizens like Daniel and Reality, and there's really no way to fight it. It's wrong.
Picking up on what Billie said, that's because it's a strict liability law, meaning the disclosure happened or it didn't. Your intent, including your good intent, like to inform the public or to expose wrongdoing, is irrelevant and not allowed in at trial. So your good intentions in revealing war crimes and unlawful torture and surveillance and all of this stuff doesn't matter a bit under the Espionage Act. It's an antiquated law from 1917, before the word classified even existed in the 1950s. Yet they're using this antiquated law, to go after whistleblowers when there are some dozen other laws that would be more appropriate but are less punitive and would be a better fit. But instead they're using this heavy-handed law to basically deprive people of mounting any sort of meaningful defense about why their conscience drove them to take this action and why their oath to the Constitution informed their choices. So it's a very pernicious law. It should be repealed, in my opinion. Tinkering with it, yes, there are efforts to reform it. But again, it's an antiquated law that's specifically being used to go after uniquely, not people who've spied on the country for profit, but whistleblowers who've just put out information to the public about what the public has a right to know.
Exactly. And that's another great point in what we talk about, classified information. I think that our government has gotten to the point where they classify things they don't want the people to know, not because it needs to be classified. It's because they don't want this information out to us. And, you know, when a government starts to hide and cover up and lie and classify things that shouldn't be classified, that's when we've lost our democracy. You know, I look at the document that my daughter released, and I think, why was that classified? Why was that being hidden from us? You know, there was so much talk about it in the news. Why was that document classified? You know?
Right.
And that really is something that the American people should be looking at. If we are truly a country of we the people, that we govern ourselves, why is our government that's supposed to be us hiding things from us, hiding the drone program and everything involved in that, hiding, you know, an attack on our election from us?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that that's illustrated by the absurdity of, in reality's case, she didn't even expose something that we were doing, right? She exposed something that a foreign entity was doing that they weren't sharing with the American public, right? Which, if any, would be the opposite of espionage, I would think. But so I think that it's such a salient example of how much this is not actually about a concern for national security or espionage, right? It's about that punishment that Jesselyn is speaking to.
Well, reality, basically, I mean, her sin is that she contradicted the president of the United States, who's been saying Russia didn't interfere, Russia didn't interfere, Russia didn't try to interfere. And what she revealed was basically what we now know is true and what's on the front page of every newspaper today, which is Russia did interfere and has been attempting to interfere. And on that note, we attempt to interfere with their elections too. But it's about keeping this government narrative about sanitized war, about our foot in these conflicts, about our involvement in these dark ops programs. And then if anyone tells the truth about it, even within boundaries classification, there's a huge problem with overclassification. Most of what's classified probably doesn't need to be, but that's a separate thing we could spend another hour on.
Yeah.
But this is about hiding embarrassment, the government's embarrassment over botched programs, ineffective targeting, war crimes, all sorts of malfeasance, and punishing the people who dare challenge that.
Billions of dollars lost in black boxes when right now all people are trying to do is get a leg up to survive COVID.
Right. Absolutely. And, the point about, I haven't thought about it on the angle of over-classifying as a tool, right? An intentional tool. Although when you say that, it resonates because I'm like, oh yeah, I saw all kinds of things be classified when I was in the military that definitely didn't need to be classified. It became kind of a cover your ass, just like general thing to do. And
you can't prosecute it because there's no legal definition. In fact, right. Obama put out the entire, I think it was called the Mitigating Classification Act or something of that nature. And the definition of overclassification simply doesn't exist.
Wow. Yeah. And so that creates, one of the conversations we have when we talk about GI resistance, right? Many of us came to a point where we realized we were morally at odds with what we were participating in while we were still under contract in the military, and then facing this moral crisis of what do we do, feeling trapped, feeling like you don't have options. And when we talk about GI resistance, there's this tendency to want to say, well, you don't have to follow unlawful orders, right? It's as simple as that, right? There's this kind of public, sense that there's this good faith that you can just be like, oh, sir, that's not a lawful order, so I'm not going to follow it and everything will be fine. And in fact, what is a lawful order and what is not a lawful order has just become increasingly, gray area, legally speaking. And it's become, for many of the reasons that have already been discussed, become almost impossible to be able to take a stand as a soldier, as a federal agent, whatever it is, and say, hey, I'm not going to do this because this is illegal. You have almost often very limited tools at your disposal to defend yourself legally in refusing an order, or whether that's sharing information or whether that's refusing to participate in something. If they can just classify everything and say, well, you can't tell anyone about this, then how do you ever have a standing to even talk about what you're refusing to participate in? And so I think, like, I say that because I want folks to really register the kind of implications of this that ripple across our entire government, right? Where it's like, if there's no way for there to be any kind of transparency or accountability around what is lawful to classify, to hide, to order someone to participate in that is hidden and classified, right? Then there's literally no recourse. There's no recourse that is legal right now for people who say, I don't want to be a part of this violence, or I don't want to be a part of this thing that actually violates the oath that I took to the American people.
Or challenge the classification.
Right.
And admits that it has classified so much stuff that it's lost track of what is classified. They admit there's a huge overclassification problem, but there's no penalty for overclassification. So I see, like, someone classified a baby announcement. Yeah, I mean, just absurd levels of stuff. No one is held to account for that. And then we see different agencies. I've seen the same document from different agencies with different levels of classification on it. That happens a lot. And there's no accountability for this or way to challenge the classification. So I get reams of documents in Discovery marked classified, and your hands are tied on the civilian side.
It's also interesting too. A lot of people, what they don't know is they'll say things like, oh, well, Reality can go out and write a book, or Daniel can go write a book. They're going to end up just fine because they're going to make a whole lot of money. What they don't realize is that the plea agreements now, they basically say that you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren cannot talk anything about the whole court situation and all of it. So this myth that, like, there's so many myths, like the right to redress. Is there one? I don't think so. Not in reality. Is there all of these things that people just think about cases like this are simply mythological, and maybe by design.
Well, you see that with Edward Snowden's book. I mean, the government has already moved to claim all the proceeds from this. So the idea that people are going to make bank, off a documentary for which you're not paid, or off a book which the government is going to take all the proceeds from, is just ridiculous. And most plea agreements say you may never, not only you, but I don't know how they would ever enforce this against your progeny, but you may not ever talk about this stuff again, even if everyone else on the planet is talking about it, which is also crazy to me.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Yes, in our family's case, Reality's plea agreement, she will never be able to benefit financially from any aspect of her case, and neither can her family or her future family. I mean, they covered, her children, grandchildren, and of course our family. And, in the beginning of Reality's case, somebody from Virginia that I've never even met set up a GoFundMe for our family to help us through this. And the government actually demanded that we write them a check for some of that money that had been donated to our family. And we had to do it because, they took the money.
And I want to say, on Billie's behalf, GoFundMe has a way to return the money from the people who donated it.
Yes. And I tried to do that. I tried to
that was denied.
Yes. Yeah. I tried to, tell them there was just a button that you can push and GoFundMe that returns back to the donor. And I had asked for the, option to return the money to everyone who donated, because it was all right there. But the government wouldn't allow us even to do that. The government wanted that money. And so we had to actually write a check out to the government and turn over the money that had been donated to help our family through this.
That's so awful. I'm so sorry. That's an absolute outrage.
But that's how vindictive and petty the government is when you've told something that they didn't want released. It's all punitive. This is all punitive. Yeah. Reality didn't release something that, put us in danger, No. But our government is just, they want to make sure that she pays the price, that our family pays the price, and they want to make sure that anyone else who thinks about releasing the truth thinks twice about it, because look at what happened to Reality Winner.
Right.
Actually, they said that in the news. I mean, when she was prosecuted on that day, they had a press briefing outside, and they said the reason why we gave Reality Winner so long is because we want anybody else to think twice about this. And what we're sitting here trying to talk to the public about is that, for me, I can sleep at night, right? It's crucial for me to be honest about my experience in the drone program and to navigate this, what's classified, what's not, say what's this and what's not. That's hard. And that was hard before everything that happened with Daniel. That's hard for all of us. And to have all these vagaries and this unclear, everybody thinks it's so black and white. Just do this and you'll get this. Or, there are proper channels. I mean, all of these things are, like, to me, they're like unicorns. They're completely mythological creatures.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we've talked about this a little bit, but I just, I'm curious if you all have any additional comments on why. Like, obviously for punitive, but why is this level of punishment and punitiveness necessary in the government's eyes, do you think, for folks who are really actually trying to be dutiful and have integrity in the eyes of the American public?
I think it's systemic. Whenever you have a government system or any system in place, its only mission is to grow. And secrecy was one of those things. I mean, people always look at government secrecy and secrets through the lens of McCarthyism, or through the lens of this war, or through the lens of that. But when you look at secrecy and take it alone and look at the institution of secrecy itself, it's multiplied and it's grown beyond any recognition.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also because these programs are somewhat very constitutionally suspect. I mean, the Supreme Court in the enemy combatant cases, basically said, no, you can't torture Americans. No, you can't be torturing people. This is not okay. Mm-hmm. So secrecy kind of keeps this stuff from judicial review. Even if it goes for judicial review, then the government raises state secrets privilege, so a court can't look at it. So there's a very big vested interest in keeping some of our worst conduct to keep it not only secret, but punishing the whistleblower is part of that enforcement mechanism of maintaining secrecy so we can do more bad things, basically.
Yep. I think that makes sense. I mean, from my view, I've thought that it was, I think that it shouldn't be this way, right? But that when folks who really face the most impact and harm from the result of these programs, right? The hundreds of people who aren't charged with anything, who are still sitting in Guantanamo Bay and might die there, the people, who are having to live, who have grown up in many cases their entire lives in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., with armed drones just flying over their head, the sound of it, right? That's just a part of their daily life, is living under these flying
objects of terror.
Well, exactly, terrorism. And our media machine and our government propaganda machine has done such a good job, and I was part of the propaganda machine. I was a PSYOP officer. Has done such a good job, unfortunately, of painting folks from Afghanistan and Iraq as this kind of vague, scary other, right? That when folks try to speak up and tell the truth, they're not listened to, right? They're not taken seriously. The public is really kind of conditioned to not listen to those voices. And those folks are almost never even included in the conversation. And so, you know, in this case, I think that, like, to me, that speaks to why is that the government knows that because they've done this, you know, this buildup of plastic patriotism and support the troops, and veterans have all this credibility, that it's incredibly dangerous in a unique way for folks who have done the deeds themselves, who have been inside the system and are speaking from their lived experience about what they participated in, right? The credibility that those folks hold in the eyes of the international community and the American public is incredibly dangerous to those secrets that, you know, we're all speaking to. And so, I think that that's an important piece of the story to acknowledge. And, you know, and I also say that as an encouragement to remember for those who are still in the military or who are struggling with what your choices are and feeling like you have no options, that it does matter. It matters to speak up, and that there are ways to do that. And if it didn't matter, the government wouldn't be spending so much effort to try to silence us, right? And so, and there are ways to do it, you know, that can help you avoid the kinds of consequences that some are facing. You know, I know that Lisa is involved in a whole network of folks, and many others. Jesselyn, right? There's a whole community of folks. About Face has a reporting and support request line, and we can connect you to legal support, and you can also call the GI Rights hotline to talk about your options. And so I just want to remind folks that you do have a choice, because I know how much in the military you're made to feel like you don't. And I assume in these federal agencies as well.
I just wanted to throw out one last thing real quick before. I just wanted to say that, you know, a lot of people are afraid of this term insider threat. The truth is an insider threat. And I think it's worth considering that it shouldn't be.
Yep. I mean, sorry, not to be too long-winded, but I mean, I was investigated as an insider threat, and all I did was post facts, right? Facts that were publicly available, and I think that says everything. It's like, you know, I mean, other than that, I had incredibly high officer evaluations. You know, I was well respected. All of these things. I was continuing to try to do my job because I felt responsible to my troops, but it was for that same reason that I was like, I can't keep being silent while these 18-year-old kids are being told that they're going to go save people and fight for freedom, when I know that that's not what's happening, you know. And anyway, without any further ado, does anyone, any last things you want to share, especially ways that people can be supporting, can be pressuring, you know, members of Congress or others for change? I think we can just go around, do a go around for any last comments or suggestions.
So for Reality, our group is developing a brand new petition for her release. We're asking for commutation of her sentence. She did file for clemency in February. And so with the new administration coming on, what we want to do is increase the volume on her situation and try to get the attention of the White House to commute her sentence and to bring her home. So look for that.
Absolutely. And will folks be able to find that on the support Reality? Let me see.
List.
Yep, .org. Okay.
Standwithreality.org. Yes.
Standwithreality.org.
That. And then I'm also working with another group, Military Families Speak Out, and we're hoping to do a postcard and letter writing campaign as well.
Great.
So, but we will have that information on the standwithreality.org website.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to say that Sonia Kennebeck, who directed National Bird, I want to put out there that the movie about Reality Winner is coming out. You can follow Sonia Kennebeck on Twitter, and I'll put out the what her handle is there, and also to watch National Bird, so you'll understand like what this drone program thing is.
Yeah, absolutely. I posted the link to the documentary in the comments, so you should be able to find information about how you can watch that documentary. I believe it's on Netflix, and also information about Sonia on that page as well.
And if you need to talk to a lawyer before you blow the whistle, usually people come to me after they've blown the whistle and are being retaliated against. Talk to a lawyer before you blow the whistle. You can find me on the www.exposedfacts.org website. I run the whistleblower and source protection program, and we are a nonprofit, so we're not going to charge you anything. It's free legal advice for people who are thinking of blowing the whistle or have blown the whistle and are being retaliated against. And we have a special focus on national security and intelligence whistleblowers.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing to know. And I also want to uplift your point from earlier about the fact that that espionage law needs to be repealed, you know, and of course we support efforts to make, you know, harm reduction reforms in the meantime. But what really needs to happen, like Jesselyn said, is for that to be repealed. And so look into it. See if your representatives are supporting that right now. And if not, give them a call, set up meetings, see what you can do to encourage them to support an effort like that. Because really, you know, if you're concerned about national security, that is doing a lot of harm to our national security when we think about security from the place of what really like make sure that we're healthy and we have an accountable government, and that things are running the way that they're supposedly supposed to, right? And then I will, of course, make a plug for Daniel again. We posted the link to his fundraiser in the comments. He really needs all the support he can get right now. I mean, like so many out there do, but if you have extra coin, throw some his way. I know that he's bashful about asking for support, but for us, this is, you know, Daniel has been a longtime member, has put in a lot of work in trying to make amends, as many of us are, in what we participated in by speaking out and telling the truth and spreading the word in places where maybe our voices can be listened to where others won't be. And so it's so important that we follow through and really support folks when they take those kinds of risks, because it's not just about them, right? It's about this broader effort to repress the truth. And every time we allow that to happen with one person, it kind of adds to that snowball effect. And so it's important that we fight those battles. So please sign that petition at a minimum, share if you're not able to donate, you know, and continue to uplift stories like this. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have additional stories that you want to share, we welcome them. You can reach out to us via social media and share this documentary so other folks can learn about what whistleblowers are, what GI resistance and radical truth telling are. I'm also dropping our active duty support line in the chat. This is an encrypted form that people can fill out anonymously or with their information if they want to be reached out to get support. And you can either just report information about something that you're seeing that is not okay anonymously, or you can reach out to request, you know, connection to legal support or peer support to talk through your options if you're facing a moral crisis. A lot of us have been in that place as veterans where we felt really alone. And we are not lawyers, of course, but we are in relationship with a lot of folks who want to help you and can help you before you make whatever choice is right for you, whatever that may be. And with that, thank you again, Billie, Jesselyn, Lisa. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your stories, for the work that you do. I know I am just so grateful to know that folks like you are out in the world doing what you do. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you
for having us.
It was an honor. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
Bye.